This is our Identity Tile Project Surface Decoration Technique video. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to smooth out your tile. So at this point, your tile is leather hard, and you want to make sure the surface of your tile is even. So you're going to take either a fork or a serrated rib tool, and you're going to scratch the surface of the tile. Think of it like a rake raking the sand, and you want to do it in multiple directions. Either tool works fine. I personally like the serrated rib tool better. Then you're going to take the blue rubber rib tool, and you're going to use that to now smooth out those lines. You're really going to smooth out the surface. You're going to do it both on top of the clay and on the sides of the clay. Do not attempt to do this if your tile is still leather hard. So if you rolled out your tile and you want to smooth it out, you need to put your tile in front of a fan for a few minutes. If you're in class with me, the fan will be set up for you. If you're at home, you can turn on a fan or take a piece of cardboard and manually fan your piece. You can see that I am using a damp sponge. It's important that the sponge is damp and not soaking wet, so I squeezed out all that excess water. If your sponge is soaking wet, you will obviously bring too much moisture back into the clay, and your clay will get soft and plastic again. So if you want to keep it leather hard, minimize the water. In the video, I am putting my tile away, spraying the t-shirt damp, keeping it on my workboard, putting it in a plastic bag. But obviously, if you're ready to work, you can leave your tile out. And notice that I am also working on top of my banding wheel. Those of you at home won't have a banding wheel. Those of you in class will. I apologize for that. I don't have enough to send home. The next thing I'm going to show you is tracing your drawing. You can see that I did my original drawing of my tile design with my Luna moth on it. Here is a sped up video of me tracing it. You don't have to trace your original drawing, but it is recommended, and you'll see why later. The next step I'm going to show you is sculpting solid forms. So I know for my Luna moth identity tile, I want the body of my moth, the center body of my moth, to be sculpted. In other words, I want it to be a 3D form that is sculpted by hand and attached to the tile. So you can see me pulling off, I'm going to be cutting off a piece of clay using my cutting wire or cutting string, depending on which you have. And I'm going to be using that small piece of wedge clay to make my sculpted form. It's important to have a cup of water nearby. Really important when you're sculpting, you have water nearby. As you sculpt with the clay, it will begin to dry out. I'm also going to take out my tile, keep it on my workboard, unwrap it, put it back on my banding wheel. The banding wheel is just a spinning wheel that allows me to work on all sides of the project. That way I can figure out the size of the body of my moth, both according to my drawing and according to the size of the tile. I'm going to pull off what I need. I'm going to look at my drawing and use that as a guide. So this is why I asked you guys to draw your drawing to scale. In other words, I asked you to draw out a 5-inch by 5-inch box and draw your identity tile design the actual size you wanted it, because it helps you figure this stuff out. So you can see me kind of sculpting with my fingers, and sculpting is just that: pinching, pulling, molding, shaping the clay. You'll notice I periodically dip my fingers into water to help me shape it. I can add more clay if I need it. So if you have 2 pieces of plastic clay, you could just smush them right together, right? Taking a little bit of water. I realized I needed more clay to make the top of my moth body a bit wider. So I just smushed that extra piece of plastic clay on. Again, using the drawing to help guide me. Going to add a little bit more clay to the base to make it the bottom of the body, to make it a little bit longer. And again, smoothing it on. 2 pieces of clay are plastic, so I can just smush them together. Molding, shaping, pinching. So I have the body of my moth. And that is a 3-dimensional sculpted form. That's a very simple sculpted form. I'm keeping it simple. But now I have to hollow it out. What does that mean? Hollowing it out, anytime you have a sculpted form that is thicker than a 1/2 inch, you have to remove some of the clay from the inside of it. So what you're seeing me do here is using either a pin tool or a toothpick to just create some lines on my tile by tracing it down so I know where to place the body on my tile. And then you're going to need to, so that just helps me. So then you're going to need to take that sculpted form, lay it down, make sure it fits well. And now I have to make sure it fits and kind of reshape it a bit. And now I have to hollow it out. How do you know when to hollow out? Anytime you have a sculpted form that is thicker than 1/2 inch, you must hollow it out. You can use a loop tool. You can even just use a paper clip, works great. And what that does is it allows you to scoop out the inside of the clay. Clay likes to dry at an even rate. So you want to try to make everything on your tile relatively even thickness. If you have a sculpted form that's 3 inches thick, that's going to dry a lot slower than your 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch tile. So what I'm doing is I'm hollowing out the underside of the body of the moth to ensure that it's a little bit more closer to the thickness of the tile itself. So every hollowed out form is going to need to be hollowed out differently, and I can help guide you when you guys are working on that. This is a very simple form. Now, if I put that moth body on the tile right now as is, it would just create a giant air pocket. So what I'm doing with my loop tool, and you can use a paper clip as well, right, is I am literally scooping out a hole through the tile where that hollowed out sculpted form is going to go, so that when I place that form on the tile, the space on the inside of that form that has been hollowed out, that air now has a place to vent out. So we call this essentially a vent hole. So again, if you put that moth body on the tile without putting a hole through the tile, you'd be creating a giant air pocket. So I created a vent hole right where the body's going to be attached. I'm now using a paintbrush to clean it up. Smooth it out. I'll clean it up in the back as well. And now I have a vent hole, and I can attach that body right on top of the vent hole. Now you're going to see me either take the serrated rib tool or the fork and rough up the surface of the clay right where the body of the moth gets attached. What is this called? This is called scoring. When you have 2 pieces of clay that you want to attach, and at least one of them is leather hard, like my tile is, you must score and add slip to the clay in order to get those forms to attach to one another. So the scoring creates a rough surface, and the slip, which is essentially clay mixed with water, which I have in the cup right now. I put a piece of clay in there and I mixed it with water. It just becomes this goopy material. It acts as an adhesive. So I scored both surfaces, meaning I roughed up both surfaces. I attached the glue, which is the slip, the clay and water, and that's what helps the 2 forms, this tile and the body of the moth, adhere to one another. So again, if you have 1 piece of clay that's leather hard or 2 pieces of clay that are leather hard that you're attaching, you must slip and score. The only time you can attach 2 pieces of clay together without slipping and scoring is if they're both plastic. So now I'm pressing that body on. I'm shaping it a little bit with my finger, cleaning it up. So I hollowed out the form. I made a vent hole. I scored both the form and the tile surface. I added slip, which is my glue. I pressed the form down to make sure I wasn't trapping air between the tile and the form. And now I am using the curved end of my wood tool here to do something called fusing. And you can see I'm holding it up to the camera. It simply means that you're taking the 2 pieces of clay that you're attaching together and fusing the seam. So all around the body of the moth, I am fusing the seam. And that's going to ensure that the body of the moth stays adhered to the tile. Now you probably notice it looks a little bit messy. So I'm going to take my paintbrush. You all have a paintbrush in your kit, sorry. And I am cleaning up around the fused areas. You can also use a sponge, again, a lightly damp sponge. You can use your fingers. Your fingers are a great tool. Don't be afraid to use your fingers. You don't always have to use some other tool. You can just use your hands and your fingers when it works for you. Just kind of cleaning it up. And now you can see that the body of the moth is firmly adhered to the tile. Relief is rolling and cutting thin, flat shapes of clay. This is probably the most popular technique that gets used for the identity tile project. I'm going to make the wings of my moth relief. In other words, I want to roll out thin, flat pieces of clay and cut out my wings and attach them. So I have my wedge clay. I don't need to use all my wedge clay. I just took a small piece. And I'm pounding it out, flattening it up a bit. And now I'm going to use a rolling pin and thin thickness strips. So you all have either 3/8 or 1/2 inch thickness strips. That's only for your base of your tile only. If you're in class with me, you can use the 1/4 or 1/8 inch thickness strips. If you're home, I recommend using 2 magazines that are the same thickness, or 2 thin books, or any other objects that are flat that are the same thickness that you could put on either side of your clay. I don't have enough 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch thickness strips to send home. And as long as they're on either side of your clay underneath your rolling pin, you can roll out a nice, thin, flat, even piece of clay. You want it to be thin. You want it to be between 1/4 and 1/8 inch. You can see here I'm using the toothpick or the pin tool to pop any air bubbles I may have missed. Sometimes you get little ones when you roll out a slab. And now I'm going to make sure it's evenly rolled. And here's the thing with relief. You cannot cut out shapes from this thin flat tile until you put it in front of a fan or you hand dry it. So you could take a piece of cardboard and fan it yourself. So the clay that you're seeing me now work with is actually leather hard. I took it, I put it in front of a fan, a big window fan, for about 5 minutes, and I let the clay stiffen up a bit. And it's really important to not try to cut out shapes from a thin flat piece of clay unless it is leather hard. So right now I'm taking my trace of my original drawing. So this is why it's important to do a tracing of your drawing to scale if you're planning on using relief. You can freehand draw on the clay. You don't have to use a trace, but I really recommend, everybody's going to have tracing paper in their kit, and I really recommend that you use the tracing paper. Even if you draw on the tracing paper freehand and then trace it onto the clay, it's much easier. I'm using a ballpoint pen to trace down all 4 wings, both the 2 tail wings as well as the upper large wings. Peel off the tracing paper. Tracing paper is great because it won't stick to the clay. And you can just see the light outline of those wings. Now you can use either a pin tool or an X-Acto blade. I can't send X-Acto blades home, so you can use your pin tool to do this as well. And again, it will only work if your clay is leather hard. If you try to do this when your clay is soft and plastic, it's going to be near to impossible to cut out neat, clean shapes. So I'm using the blade, but you can use a pin tool as well. And I'm very carefully cutting out my wing shapes. If you make a mistake, you saw me use my finger there, you can smooth it out. And now I'm going to do the bottom 2 wings as well as the other upper wing. So I'm taking my time to make sure I get my lines precise. Again, you can freehand do this with just the cutting tool, but I don't recommend it. So now I'm ready to attach those wing pieces to my tile. I'm going to remove the excess clay, and you can see I can easily separate the wing pieces because they're leather hard, so they don't lose their shape easily. I'm going to take all that excess clay that I pulled away, and I'm just going to do a quick mini wedge because I want to put that clay back with my rest of my wedge clay, and I want to make sure that it doesn't have any air bubbles from folding the clay together. So I'm just going to do a quick pounding And then I'm going to quick pounding, putting it in with the rest of my wedge clay. And now I am going to attach those wing pieces to my tile. So I pull my tile back out. I'm using my sketch to guide me. And these are relief pieces. You can still mold and shape these. So you're going to see that I kind of curve the wing a little bit. So I don't want these wings laying flat on the tile. I want them actually kind of curved. So I'm adding a little bit of water and I'm curving the wing up. And right now I'm just going to place them. So I'm not attaching anything yet. I am just placing them where I want them to go. Using a little bit of water on my fingers. Anytime the clay feels too stiff, you can just put a little water on it with your fingers and you can bend and mold it. Don't try to force it because it will crack. I'm going to place it where I want it. And now I have to use that same score, slip, and fuse technique in order to get the wings adhered to the tile. You're going to notice that I'm allowing air to free flow between the wings and the tile. That's fine as long as the air has an exit area. I'm going to use my fork or my serrated rib tool to score wherever the two pieces of clay are touching. So I'm scoring the edge of the body, the edge of the tile. I'm going to add slip there. Remember, slip acts as an adhesive. Now I'm scoring the underside of the wings where it attaches to the body and the tile. I'm going to place it on. Using my fingers to press it down. Move the other wing out of the way. I use the curved wood tool again, or you can use a paintbrush to fuse that wing on. Remember, what I'm holding up now actually is a burnishing tool. That's a tool that'll be accessible to students in the classroom. It's also good for fusing. So wherever the wing touches the tile or the body of the moth, I have to fuse it down. So if not in that airspace, but wherever the clay, two pieces of clay touch, even underneath the wing, because the wing sticks out off the tile, making sure that's fused. I'm going to fuse it onto the body. And I'm going to show you the underside of the wing. The underside of the wing is a very fragile spot because it's sticking out over the tile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some reinforcement clay. I'm going to score it. I'm going to add some clip, and I'm going to take some soft plastic clay, and I'm not even going to score it because it's so soft. As long as the leather hard piece of clay, it's so small, as long as the leather hard piece of clay is scored and has slip on it, I'm going to take some of that plastic clay and put it underneath the wing to act as a reinforcement to thicken it up a bit, just to make sure that that wing doesn't become an area that's susceptible to breaking. So you could just see I'm fusing it on. So it doesn't change the way it looks from the top. It just reinforces it from underneath. Going to use the paintbrush to clean up all my fused areas. My fingers are a great tool as well. And now I'm going to need to repeat the process with my large wing on the other side and my two small tail wings. And I'll do that with a time-lapse photography so you don't have to watch the process in real time. Just kind of cleaning everything up. The great thing about clay is if you make a mistake, you can fix it as long as the clay is leather or plastic hard. Now you can see I'm adding the other wings, slipping and scoring, fusing, reinforcing that wing that hangs off the tile, adding my 2 bottom wings, make sure I have the placement right. Score, slip, fuse, clean up. It's the same process. It's really all the same different techniques. And now I'm going to show you how to use carving and stamping to add detail and texture to your tile. So right now I have the basic shape of my moth. And I want to add all those details. If you remember from my original painting, I had those lines that were in the wings as well as the texture that was on the bark of the tree that the moth was on. So you're going to see me use carving to add the lines on the moth wing, as well as carving to add the outline of the tree branch and the edge of the tree. I'm freehand carving it in. So carving just means digging into the clay. I'm literally just using a pin tool and I'm carving into the clay. You can use a toothpick, or you can experiment with other tools. You could use the tip of a pencil if you wanted to, depending on the thickness of the line you want. So I could have traced this down, but instead I'm free drawing it based on my original drawing and my tracing. And I'm tracing out where I want the branches. And I'm simply using a pin tool. But feel free to experiment with different tools. They make different carved line thicknesses depending on what you're looking for. So I now have the tree carved out, and I'm going to use a rubber stamp for stamping. Stamping simply means pressing an object into the clay to make an impression. You could literally go outside and find a piece of bark and press that bark into your clay to get bark texture, and that would work just as well. And even if a little piece of bark gets stuck in your clay, it's fine. It's organic matter. It'll just fire out in the kiln. But I'm using the rubber stamp that I happen to have in the classroom because it feels like the texture on the rubber stamp is a good match for the kind of texture I created in my painting. You can see me pressing down. I might go back in and add a little bit more. So you can use a piece of jewelry. You can use a pendant on your necklace, whatever you want to press into the clay to make a variety of textures. So there was the original bark that I had, and then I used that stamping tool to kind of create a similar type texture. So you can experiment with different stamping techniques. I have letter stamps in the classroom. If you have letter stamps at home, great. Use them. You can use, like I said, pieces of jewelry, organic material. You can press a leaf into the clay and carefully pull it out, and it'll make a beautiful impression of a leaf on the surface of your clay. The clay will pick up all the detail. So now I'm showing you how I'm going to use my needle tool to carve the lines on the wings of the moth. And I'm just going to freehand do this. Again, you can trace it if you want. I felt pretty confident just looking at my drawing and tracing it, knowing that if I made a mistake, I could just take a little water on my finger and wipe it away and start over. And you're going to see as I work on this for the last few minutes of this demo, I am only focusing on one side of the moth just to save time. So I'm not going to complete the whole tile. I'm just sort of showing you what would be my right side of the moth, your left side as you're viewing it. And just using that needle tool to gently carve all those detailed lines that I had in my painting. I'm very familiar with what a Luna moth looks like. I love them. I think they're one of the most beautiful insects. Certainly the prettiest of the moths. They're very large and beautiful green color, but they have all this white and green pattern on their wings. And so I'm trying to capture that. Obviously, later on when this gets painted, I could add some more of that detail. So you're going to see me as I use this tool that I periodically pick the tool up off the clay and wipe it with the tip of my finger. You're probably noticing that I'm doing that. I do it almost instinctively when I'm working with the tool. That is because as you carve through the clay, it will pick up pieces of clay. And if you keep carving with it, it's going to make the clay carving really messy. So you have to periodically clean off the tip of your toothpick or your pin tool or whatever tool you're using to carve with to keep your carving relatively neat. Now I'm just going to do the tail. So you can see the detail carved in, very similar to my original painting. And now you're going to see me use a very small detail paintbrush. At this point, you should all have this paintbrush in your kit, even the students at home. And you're going to see me use this paintbrush with a little bit of water and my finger to go through the carved lines and clean them up. And you're going to periodically see me wipe the tip of the paintbrush off with my finger, again, to clear away the excess clay. I'll dip it in the water. I'll do a little bit of brushing. I'll clean off the tip of the brush, and then I repeat the process. So I am going through those lines, cleaning it up, and now I'm going to add some finishing touches. I'm going to clean up some more of the lines, and then I'm going to add the two horns and the antennas that belong on the moth head. So you see me here just sort of finishing up, cleaning up those lines. And remember, this whole time I'm working with the clay, the majority of the tile is leather hard. Even the wings and are leather hard because I dry them in front of the fan. The body of my moth started out as plastic, but because I've been working on my tile for a while, it's probably become leather hard. So you want to pay attention to detail. That's really what's going to make your tile come to life, your ideas come to life. So that detail paintbrush is not just for painting later on in the semester, it's also for really working in the small detail areas of your clay project where maybe some of the other tools can't reach, whether it's a carved area or a little nook or cranny that you need to fuse. The detail brush is going to come in very handy, and we ordered enough so that every student would have one. You can see me using my finger. So I'm just doing the finishing touches, cleaning up those lines. It's very relaxing doing this. When if you're in class with me, we'll have on music in the background. We could talk and chat. If you're at home learning, you'll still be with us through the computer. You can set up an environment for yourself at home where you have music playing in the background. It should be a creative, relaxing experience to do this, and I'll be there to answer questions. You're all going to have different challenges you face because you're all sculpting, using relief, carving, and stamping different things, and I will guide you along the way. If there's something that you're envisioning in your head, but you don't know which technique to use or how to approach it, that's my job. I will help guide you through that, and we will problem solve together. There's a lot of problem solving here, learning the techniques and then figuring out how to use them to make your ideas come to life. So I'm just doing the finishing touches on the lines. I'm also going to use the detail brush to clean up the lines on the tree branch, so the outer edge of the tree branch, making sure those lines are clear. And then I'm going to actually use my loop tool to carve away the background. So if you remember from my original painting, I had sky in the background, and I want to make sure that my tree pops out from my background. So I could have used relief to make the tree if I wanted to, like I did the moth wings, but I decided instead I'm going to use the carving technique and just carve away a very thin layer of clay from the background where the sky is, maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. You don't want to carve away too much because remember the tile is only 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick. And I'll hold it up in a moment so you can see what it looks like. But doing this with the loop tool is really going to help the tree and the tree branches pop a little bit so it stands out from the sky in the background. And I'll only do it on one side so that we save some time. And the demonstration's almost finished here. I know it's a long one. It's probably one of the longer ones you'll see this year, but that's because I'm trying to teach you all the techniques at once. And this video will be on YouTube and on our Google Classroom, so you can come back to it at any point. So if 2 weeks from now you're starting the relief technique and you don't quite remember how to use it, you can go back to that section of the video and just rewatch that part to remind you. So I'm just kind of cleaning up that carved area, and you can see how the tree and the tree branch pop out a little bit more now that I carved away the background. I'll do that at the top as well. And again, when you're carving, if you choose to carve away your background, Do not carve away too much. Your clay is only so thick, and if you carve away too much, you'll make it too thin and too fragile. But the loop tool that I gave you guys works really well. It's kind of the perfect size, not too big, not too small. So you can see how the tree pops out a lot more on your right side and less on the left side where I didn't do that carving. And then the very last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the little horns and the antennas that are on the moth. And I'm going to do them a little bit differently than I did it in the drawing, just because I'm concerned about the antennas sticking too far off the tile. I feel like they'll be too fragile. You're going to see me just use my fingers again, and I'm hand sculpting. I don't need to hollow these forms out, even though they're sculpted forms. I don't need to hollow them out because they're so small. They're not thicker than a 1/2 inch, so it's fine. And I'm going to score the surface, add a little bit of slip. Just take that plastic clay, and I'm going to attach the 2 little horns. You can roll, you can pinch, squeeze the clay to get the shape that you want, again with a little bit of water on your finger. And I'm going to attach that and then make another. So I have the 2 little horns on. We're almost done here, finishing up. Going to use my paintbrush to make sure those little horns are fused on, right? Make sure you wipe away all that excess clay that might be on your paintbrush. Get it nice and moist, and then smooth those forms on. Now I'm going to make the 2 little white antennas, but again, I'm not going to have them sticking out off the tile the way I did in the painting. I decided afterwards that probably wasn't structurally the smartest idea. Instead, I'm going to sculpt them and kind of have them come off the head and then curve down onto the edge of the tile so they're a little bit more secure. Sometimes when I sculpt, I like to sculpt the forms and place them where I want them to see what they look like before I slip and score. You can feel free to do that. And this is the last thing that I'll be adding to the moth. And again, I'm not going to do what is my left side of the moth for the sake of keeping the video relatively, well, I don't know if short is the right word. This is a long video, but keeping it as short as I possibly can while getting all the information to you guys that you need. And this is really, for now, the last demo for this project. You will eventually have a glazing demo when we use our ceramic glazes, but this will be the last demo with the clay, so that moving forward, after you've seen all this and you begin to work on these techniques in class, you're basically just going to be working for several weeks during our in-person time. And I'm also going to allow you to take clay home if you want to sculpt things during your asynchronous time to then bring back to class. Those of you at home can just use your asynchronous time to work on your project, so that we're getting as close as possible to the same amount of time as what you guys would have gotten if we were in a regular school year. So I'm just adding some finishing touches here for the last few seconds of this video. Still has a lot of work. I'm going to go back in and really rework some of these details and clean it up. But hopefully this video gave you a good idea of how to approach the different techniques. Moving forward, I'll answer your questions specific to your designs. But you can see how you can make a painting or drawing come to life out of clay on the tile. And now I still have to work on this other side, obviously, to add all the details and lines